pod słońcem. Rasti u jaslama dječjim, rasti i cvjetaj zemljo radnih ljudi. I neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvojim lađama napuči i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, partije i pod srcem
เ
окраин, южный гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Страна моя родная, слава полковей, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет. За столом никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Страна моя родная, слава ей, слава ей. Весенний ветер веет, с каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать. Страна моя родная, слава ей, слава ей, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along. It is the afternoon at around about just after 2 of the 29th of November 2024, and we are doing an afternoon show for you today. And so, today we have three items on the agenda. The continued advances of the Russian armed forces on the battlefield of what was once eastern Ukraine, now more western Russia. The progress there, the Ukrainian problems, of which there are many, the trip made by Putin to Kazakhstan and what that tells us about the trajectory of the Greater Eurasian Economic Project. And of course, we finish off with an American story, or an Americas story, which I wanted to cover because what I can only describe as a collection of hysterical right-wing grifters have been misrepresenting the dialogue or the back and forth between President Sheinbaum and Trump over Trump's 25% tariffs threat. And he's rambling about fentanyl. So we'll be covering that as well, along with taking questions. So we will get into it straight away and start looking at the situation on the battlefield. I will come back to questions and comments later on. So, the situation on the battlefield for the Ukrainians is, of course, a rather negative one, to say the very least. It is, and this is what should be kept in mind when examining the hysteria that has gripped various different Western nations over the recent weeks. This should be kept in mind at all times. The fact that a lot of this whipping up of nuclear warfares, which is being engaged in by the bourgeois press in Britain, bourgeois press in the United States to a degree as well, but especially Britain, a lot of this is being stoked deliberately to manage, in a PR sense of the term, a disastrous situation in the East, and by whipping up these entirely fake stories about Putin threatening nukes and all that kind of shit, they are attempting to blind the Western population to the realities of the battlefield, which is that the Russians are now advancing at a pace quicker than at any time over the last 2 years. In fact, the initial period of the special military operation did see quicker advances, but these were not very sustainable, given that these weren't meant to be sustainable, given that in the early days of the special military operation what you saw was a rapid advance of the Russian armed forces to positions which couldn't be held because the columns of Russian soldiers weren't supported adequately enough, and they weren't meant to be, because they were meant to be a negotiating tool to be withdrawn after a certain amount of time. So, following, of course, the assumption that they were going to get a negotiated agreement. The advances now are, of course, generally speaking, much more sustainable. The question is, of course, well, why are the imperialists using the nuclear war scare to cover this up? They're doing so because they are actually, or at least their intelligence men and their senior military commanders, are very well aware of how bad the situation is for Ukraine. Now, just to dive in to the map for a while, if you will just bear with me a moment. I'm going to use this live map UA because it's a pro-NATO mapping source, but even here, if we zoom out, you can't avoid the fact that all of the offensive operations, even on this pro-NATO source, are marked in red, and that's action from the Russians. The blue markings are Ukrainian actions. And as you can see, even on this pro-NATO map, there's very few blue markings. All of these red dots with symbols on them represent Russian offensive operations. And as you can see, down the entire line of contacts, especially in the Donetsk area, here you can see there's a lot of very intense action going on. And even all the way down to the Kherson region, you can see some action going on down there. But especially the front line in Donetsk and up towards Kharkov, this is where a lot of the action is taking place. You also have the Kursk incursion, which is not marked on this map, funnily enough, but you've got most accounts from that now, even from the West, even from Western media sources, admit that whatever the objective was there, and I think that we can be fairly certain the objective was the seizure of the Kursk nuclear power plant. That was clearly something that they had in mind, as to be seized as a bargaining chip, basically. That didn't work. The Ukrainians have thrown thousands upon thousands of their best trained and best equipped troops into that mess. And again, there's been at least 30,000 casualties there. So you can see, if we zoom in here on this map, some of the areas where things are starting to turn very bad for Ukraine. And again, I'll stick a link in if you're listening to the audio version of this. But you can see here like large potential encirclements taking place up and down the front line. You can see the Russians continue to advance towards areas like Kramatorsk. Ultimately will be one of their objectives, but there's a big bulge in the front line around like Petrovka and Konstantinovka, where the Russians are advancing on either side, and slowly they are encircling big Ukrainian defensive areas. The other one being around Siversk, where you can see, if you look at the map, there's a big indentation there, as the Russians advance either side of it and slowly swallow up that those remaining Ukrainian defenders. So the situation is made worse for Ukraine by the fact that they have even has to be acknowledged by an outlet such as Deutsche Welle, a German propaganda outlet, basically, running a video piece yesterday, which I've posted on the Telegram channel, where they admitted that they've had at least 30,000 desertions this year from the Ukrainian army. I'm just going to stop sharing that map there. So they admit there's at least 30,000 men have deserted from the Ukrainian army this year alone. The Russians are claiming it's much higher than that. The Russians are claiming it's 100,000 who have deserted. So if we look at it in the same way that I would look at, so we say, claims of attendance at a demonstration between the police, who would always say that 5 men and a dog turn up, and the people who organised it, who would claim 1 million people were there, you assume that the number's around about in the middle. So Ukraine and the West are admitting that 30,000 have deserted, and the Russians are claiming 100,000. My guess would be 60 to 70,000 or so have probably deserted, at least. And it's got so bad that the Ukrainians have had to, and again, this is in the Deutsche Welle report, the Ukrainians have had to drop the punishment for desertion from being prison time to essentially the punishment being you're sent back to the front, because they realized that people were deserting, preferring to go to prison than go to the front line. So they've got a huge problem. They are running out of men who can be mobilized under the current laws. So the men that they do mobilize, many of them are deserting. They, of course, are mobilizing men in their later 40s into their 50s. We've even had reports, of course, of people as old as 70 to 75 turning up at the front line to be just used as basically meat, bullet sponges, to be stuck in front of the Russians and shot at. So the manpower crisis that Ukraine has is real, is a very real problem. And the imperialists know that, which is why you've got clowns like Boris Johnson, the man who is best described as a bin bag full of rotting custard, marinated permanently in Rioja. This clown's been out openly admitting that openly admitting for the first time in a recent interview that it is a proxy war. that's going on now, and openly calling for more mobilization of Ukrainian men, and that we're not giving Ukraine enough weapons. That usual shit, which isn't true. That isn't true. The truth is that, as many, even Western sources have admitted, the capacity of the Americans and the Brits to give more to Ukraine is limited by what we emphasize here all the time, which is their limitations on their industrial capacity. There's a severe limitation as to how many, for instance, Storm Shadow missiles can be produced in Britain. Apparently, it's about 1 a month. That's 12 a year. Now, even if they doubled that, that's only 24 a year. And they show no signs of doubling it anytime soon. Like, the Americans, the US, has burnt through a lot of its stockpiles of not only shells, but also armoured vehicles, giving loads of reconditioned Vietnam-era armoured personnel carriers and troop transports to Ukraine. They've tapped into the reserves of all of their allies, France giving loads of old equipment, Germany doing it, Australia doing it, etc., etc. And they just don't have the industrial capacity to replace the amount of equipment that the Ukrainians are losing, even just in the Kursk incursion, even just in that operation. They've lost tons of equipment getting blown up or abandoned and captured. So Boris going out there saying, oh, they can win, we're just not giving them enough equipment. Boris is, of course, a liar. But then again, he even lies about his first name. His first name isn't even Boris. His first name is the same as mine. But she's rather unfortunate for both of us, really. More unfortunate for him because I carry the name a lot better. But the point being that Boris Johnson's point is just not correct. Like the West does not have the capacity to actually replace the equipment that is being lost, and Ukraine does not really have the capacity to properly train the men who they do have available for conscription. Now we see that Biden in the name of the US collective state machine, is apparently pressing Zelensky to lower the conscription age to 18. To be honest, I'm surprised they didn't do that already, but this is what they're now pushing for. And again, this reveals the utter farce and the lies that were told about potential Western troop deployments. This was never on the cards. Like, there's no way they would take that risk. And the whole point of this war, the whole point of the Ukraine project, was, as Boris Johnson is now admitting to in his recent interview, because he needs to sell that wretched book he's written, which, by the way, I will be getting hold of and I will be doing a review of. You can look forward to that at some point soon. Politicians' autobiographies are always very interesting because they often put in there things that they don't realize are admissions. Like Obama's autobiography, his second one. The first, actually, it's not the second one, it's his first term memoirs, gave away far more than he meant to with regard to his arrogance and cluelessness and rather poverty-stricken imagination. So I will be getting Boris's book at some point, when it's in the bargain bin. I'm certainly not paying over a tenner for it. But the point being, Boris and the others are giving the game away. And they're giving the game away that by pushing for Ukraine to lower the recruitment, the draft age, saying that, if we just get the Ukrainian manpower in position, and it's just a question of equipping them. And the Ukrainian compradors, the miserable gang in Kiev, they echo this by saying, we'd do it if we just had the right amount of equipment. Of course, the training of the conscripted Ukrainian men is apparently awful for the most part. Now, some forces do get taken to Germany, to France, to Britain. I'm not sure whether they get taken to the United States. I think a few Ukrainians get taken to the United States on training courses. I'm not aware of the numbers on that, though. But we know that they're in Britain. We know that they're in France. We know that they're in Germany. There's been stories about Italy doing training as well. I haven't seen confirmation of that. But we know that the Brits, French, and the Germans have been involved in this. So some get taken for a slightly more comprehensive course in other NATO countries. But the bulk of them just get like barely a couple of weeks training. And we've seen this from testimonies of men who have surrendered to the Russians, they all have roughly similar stories, which is it's like 2 to 3 weeks training, and then they're given guns and told to walk off, walk to head to the front line, lads. Stand firm. Don't worry. Those Nazis behind you aren't training their guns on you, and that's it. So I don't see how. The only thing that recruiting a whole load of 18-year-olds is going to do is basically kill the youngest generation of Ukrainians, or the youngest adult Ukrainians, and all it will do is just hold up the Russian advance for 3 or 4 more months, maybe if you're lucky. But that's the only game the imperialists are playing now. Extend the war. Extend the war as long as you can. If that means throwing the entirety of the male population of Ukraine from 18 to 80 into the trenches and having them killed, then that's what they'll do. Because they don't dare do that at this stage to their own domestic population. That would cause dramatic destabilization, and they're not willing to go there. Some of them wish they could, but the more sensible of them know that it would be a very bad idea. So they're going to do it to Ukrainians, which leads us to the point about about what will happen now. This is literally the killing off of a nation. If you kill off the youngest men, then how is another generation going to be produced? It's not. Well, with great difficulty. Not all of them will die, but a huge number of them will. It's like the Ukrainian entanglement with the British and the American imperialists, and not forgetting the French and the German role in this as well, but the United States and the British are the leading actors in this. When Ukraine was, or its elites were brought into the Western sphere 30 years ago, really now, there is strong evidence that the Western powers have been helping to rig elections in Ukraine since 1994. Certainly they were fully on board with Leonid Kuchma rigging elections against the Communist Party of Ukraine, which, if you believe the accounts that come out of the 1990s, the Communist Party of Ukraine could have been the dominant party in the old Ukrainian system back in the 90s. I've seen the official election results looked at the strength of the Communist Party of Ukraine. They were easily the single strongest party in 90s Ukraine, but they were kept out of power by a variety of corrupt methods. With now, one might argue that the Communist Party of Ukraine had failures then as well. I don't know enough about what happened then because, of course, a lot of the sources aren't available in English, and I haven't had time to track all of them down. But my general impression is that Communist Party of Ukraine got done over by Kuchma in collaboration with the imperialists in the 1990s. Because, of course, the communist organization in Ukraine was actually pretty good following the collapse of the Soviet Union. They had the chance of they had a communist party that in comparative terms was at least as strong for a while as the Communist Party of the Russian Federation or the Communist Party of Belarus. These were, of course, the three strongest areas of CPSU organization up to the end. I mean, up to near the end, Ukrainian Communist Party was being run by at least people who didn't want the system to collapse until Gorbachev did one of them over, and Kravchuk was maneuvered into power, who was a complete comprador anti-communist swine. But the Western interference in Ukraine goes back right the way to the post-independence period, and all that it has done, all of the Ukrainian compradors' alignment with the US and the British has done, is asset strip and destroy Ukrainian industry, sell Ukrainian land off to various different financialized companies in the imperialist system, drain the population through mass migration, then kill the population in a war. This is what, like 30 years of capitalism, which has largely but not exclusively been turning towards the West, has done. Yes, the Russian oligarchy had their interests in Ukraine as well, there's no point denying that, but the drive was relentlessly towards a Western alignment. And this is this is the result. And by the way, all the people in Ukraine who had any money whatsoever, like the petty bourgeois who had some assets to sell, who could pay their way out, those who could go into exile have done so. All those who are left now in Ukraine are like the poorest elements of the working class. That's who's being sent to fight and die horrifically in the trenches of eastern Ukraine or western Russia. And that's what a 30-year alignment with the US imperialists has done. Produced a situation in this war, a war that the US imperialists and the British created and worked hard to create for 30 years. It's led to the killing of multiple generations of Ukrainians, down to the younger generation. It's a giant crime. It is a giant crime which people like Boris Johnson should be held accountable for. And hopefully one day he will be. I'd love to see that fat bastard be put on trial for all his many crimes. But the point to be made here is that now they're pushing for the 18-year-olds to be drafted. So this reveals what's really going on. The Ukraine is losing very badly, and the only solution the imperialists have now is to give more men some light weaponry, stuff them into an ill-fitting flak jacket, and throw them at the Russians in the hope that it holds the Russians up for a while. Isn't going to work. Ukraine will still lose. Vast numbers will still die. The only way forward now is going to lead to, of course, is the way that leads to a Russian victory. It's just a matter of when. And the only way that this could be stopped is if somehow, and I don't unfortunately hold out much hope for this, because what I'm about to outline would require a level of organization which I'm not sure exists inside Ukraine. But the only way to stop this is if Ukrainians were able to remove the Maidan regime itself, which, well, there's a reason why the Maidan regime suppressed all domestic opposition, starting with the Communist Party of Ukraine, because they know very well how fragile their position was going to get. And so you ban all opposition, you destroy all political organizations that could conceivably stand against you. And that's what they've done, because they knew it was going to get to this point and wanted to secure their position. So the only way, as I said, the only way it could possibly stop, though, without it coming to being ended by a Russian victory on the battlefield and the ultimate collapse of the Zelensky-led regime, is if Ukrainians themselves were able to somehow remove that regime. But I don't think that is on the cards. I would be really happy to be proved wrong on that point, but I can't see that happening for now. I think what will happen is ultimately the Kiev regime will collapse under the weight of economic failure and, of course, military defeat, and also ultimately the slow withdrawal of the US from the war. Again, not going to happen overnight. Trump will be under a lot of pressure to keep it going, and of course, as always, Trump will give in to that pressure. But ultimately, the amount of money being spent will decline. They don't have the amount of weapons that will be required to resupply the Ukrainian army, and so ultimately the Ukrainians will be left fighting with whatever they can scrounge up from existing supplies as the West slowly runs out. And then it's just a question of, well, when does the Ukrainian state get pushed into a collapse? So there you go. It is a hideous situation, but it is one that the Ukrainian comprador bourgeois brought about, and their crimes should not be forgotten with regard to this. Right, so that's our first story of the day. I'm going to pause after each section and catch up with comments and do greetings, etc. So, good afternoon to Jerry, and not a pacifist. Svetlana in Moscow, hello to you. Victor, Bojan Perko says, greetings comrades from Slovenia, once and future Republic of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Good to hear you, good to have you with us. We've got Comrade Ian Foster, we have Thomas Wolfe, we have Michael, more time needed, joining us from the English East Coast Riviera, known otherwise as Skegness. We have Working Prole joining us from Austria. We have Daniel joining us from the West Country. We have Almir in Slovenia, once and future Yugoslavia. We have T.G. Wilson. We have Grassy Knoll joining us from Seattle, Washington. We have Yu Wan joining us from Phoenix, Arizona. We have Bob coming to us from a wet and humid Queensland, Australia. And Jerry asks, anyone know about weapons? I'm half a mile from British Army firing ranges. Sometimes it's loud bangs, others it's rapid automatic firing. Loud booms all day today, can feel the ground shake. My guess, I mean, it is just a guess, would be that they're practicing artillery drills. That would be my guess. I don't know whether the Royal Artillery, if it's even still called that, does their practices round your neck of the woods, Jerry, but that would be my instinct, that it's they're practicing artillery bombardments. Right, who else have we got here? Robeson joining us from Indonesia. Davey joins us from North Wales. Eamon O'Sullivan comes to us from Cork City, Ireland. We have Robert coming to us from the wasteland of Staten Island. Good afternoon to Lee, who joins us. Hello to you, comrade. Mac 1968 says NATO is being deleted faster than YouTube is deleting my messages. Well, hopefully soon. NATO being deleted, that is, not you getting censored by YouTube. Daniel has enjoyed the intro music, including the anthem of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Svetlana says, comrades in Ukraine say that the Euro-Anglo-Western Corporation of Death, as comrades in Ukraine now call the Western powers, are insisting that draft age be lowered to 18. Anyone heard about this? Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much confirmed. Starmer hasn't said anything about it yet, but certainly that's what the British state will be pushing for. Almir says, I read that the ruble is at its lowest level since March 2022. I hope that's just speculators pushing it down. There isn't serious underlying problems in the economy. Well, to echo what Svetlana says, there's no serious underlying problem other than the fact that Russia's still a capitalist state and these things happen. Look, we in the West have this idea that a strong currency means a strong economy. I think that's because of the heavily financialized nature of our economies. And we have this idea that we have to have a strong currency. It's all part of basically what happens when the financialized interests decide everything. The ruble going to a lower level isn't necessarily a bad thing, I would argue, if you are an export-driven economy. Like an export-driven economy can see actual benefits of a lower level of its domestic currency vis-a-vis its most prominent trading partners. So I wouldn't put too much store by that. I mean, there's nothing that in the Russian economy that, to quote, to draw from Svetlana's comment, that a healthy dose of socialism couldn't solve. I mean, the Russian growth rate is between 4 and 5%, even according to the IMF and the World Bank. Those who have massive underlying problems which cannot be resolved isn't the Russians, isn't the Chinese either. It's us. It's here in Britain. It's in the United States. In both the United States and Britain, there is a huge problem with like gigantic bubbles of debt which exist ready to go pop at any moment. We have chronically low rates of investment in Britain. It's a pretty low rate of investment also in the United States. Most of what is described as economic growth comes through fiddling the figures and through counting like non-productive parasitic activity as economic activity. There is, of course, a complete inability to grow the productive base of the economies of either country now. And no real ability to tackle any of these fundamental underlying issues because the economy is so parasitic and the interests of the ruling class are linked with maintaining the situation as it is, maintaining the status quo. So the big problems are in the West. Russia has its problems, of course it does, but nothing like what exists in this part of the world. Good afternoon to Irish Partisan who joins us. Good to have you with us enjoying the afternoon broadcast. Good afternoon to Clinton who joins us from Kingston, London. Just Another Parasite asks, just what are your thoughts on the Northern Sea route replacing the Suez Canal route for international trade? Russia is increasing its fleet of icebreakers and climate change will make this more viable. I mean, I don't know about the... I know they're putting more into the Northern Sea route. So certainly, like, finally the Northwest Passage becomes a thing. So yeah, the Russians will want to be using that. It'll certainly increase economic activity in the far north of the country as well. I don't know whether it'll replace the Suez Canal because there's certain areas which you can still only reach through the Suez Canal. But then the amount of routes that are used by Russian and to a certain extent Chinese shipping is going to vary as they will start to want to avoid areas that are dominated by the West. There's also the fact that the Chinese are building new shipping routes, including a new canal through Central America. I believe it's a route that's going through Nicaragua to circumvent the Panama Canal. They're also putting together a transportation corridor through the Southern Americas, including going through Peru and going through Brazil. That's a Chinese project. So the amount of trade routes is going to get changed markedly in the next 25 years. And it's going to be changed by the dominant trading power. So that's China. The Indians will have a say in this as well. And of course the Russians will have a big say in it. Because the trade routes that have existed or grown up, certainly over the last 200 years, have been to a large extent defined by the Western sea-based empires. So Britain and the United States principally. So as other nations rise, particularly the Chinese and the Russians, the trade routes are going to change. They're going to build new ones. They're going to build new infrastructure that enables them to go overland and build new shipping canals that take them around areas that are dominated by a declining US empire that wants to deny them access to places. And countries are going to want to work on that because it will bring benefits to them. Chinese don't insist upon having total control over your country if they put in some investment. That's why their investment packages are more appealing. Cobb fan, hello to you, joining to us from Western Australia. Agricola Urbanus is with us, as is Owen, joining us from Gloucestershire. Hello Abtin, who is with us, coming to us from Sweden. Hello to Enigma. Hello to Social Emotional Learning with Dr. Donny. Why is it that pictures of leaders don't have Castro in it? Interesting question. I go for Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao because those are the primary influences of myself and thus this channel. Castro is a great revolutionary leader, undoubtedly, but I go for those whose theoretical contributions as well have been the most important for me. So yeah, you could have conceivably Castro on there, but I think the theoretical side of this that we do draws from those five: Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao. James Goblin joins us from the once and future Yugoslavia. He says, have a good 29th of November, the Yugoslav Day of the Republic. On that day, in 1945, we officially got rid of the old monarchy and became a People's Democratic Republic. Well, happy Republic Day. May it be revived soon. Right. Hello again to Scott M, who says, I trust Russian sources over a German newspaper. Well, the way I see it is the fact that Deutsche Welle had to admit that at all tells you how bad the crisis is. And that's why I quoted it. Hello to Arnold, Jacob the Squirrel, and RVA Klavek, who I believe joins us from Detroit. Svetlana says, even if there was patriotic feeling among Ukrainian soldiers, much of that has vanished, not least because the military higher-ups are stealing soldiers' wages. Yeah, I mean, the Ukrainian army is, like the rest of the Ukrainian state, completely and utterly corrupt. Like, there's nothing positive to fight for there, given that the Russians didn't even want to dismantle Ukraine. They didn't even want to go into Ukraine in the first place. I mean, the Russian government avoided doing anything much about it for years. But again, this was a war that was created in the West, forced on the Russians, and the Ukrainians are paying the price for it, and the Russians who have died as well. T.G. Wilson says, the point about Alex is making about the killing of the youth of the country was often made by Gonzalo Lira before he was tortured and allowed to die in Ukraine. Indeed, and it was probably points like that which caused him to get arrested. I mean, I've made the point many times before that that these comprador scum that run countries like Ukraine, there's no words to describe how appalling these people are. Yes, the Western imperialists, the British and the American ruling classes are absolute swines. They've always been like that. Everybody knows what they're like, or everybody should know what they're like. Their actions are completely in line with how they've behaved for hundreds of years. You can't pretend to be surprised by this. They are callous, cowardly, wretched creatures who will condemn whole nations to death, then freak out if you dare to mention it to them, you know. So their action's not a surprise. What really gets to me is these like comprador swines who will literally kill the whole nation off for a few quid, for a few dollars, which is what's being done by the comprador clique in Kiev. And the fascist guys who aid them in doing so, babbling and raving about Aryan pride and shit like that, whilst literally being the front men for the imperialists, literally being the boot boys for international finance capital, for American and British finance capital, for agribusiness, for the big banks and the big hedge funds, but screaming about national pride and honor and shit like that as they literally sacrificed the whole country for the benefit of the interests of the British and American and French and German ruling classes. Fascists fucking sicken me. Like, the British ones sicken me, obviously, because, you know, they are a tool in the hand of the ruling class. But the ones in places like Ukraine absolutely sicken me, because they do all this performative romanticist bullshit to just mask the fact that what they're doing is literally killing the country. Like, absolute scum. There's no two ways to talk about them. Like, especially the leaders. Like the leaders who hide either in Lvov or in Kiev or in the West, and will flee when the time comes to their CIA-sponsored bolt hole, if they're lucky, and will babble and rave in exile about, you know, reconquering our glorious past. Like, these people have had the run of Ukraine for 30 years, and this is what they've done with it. So thankfully, there are some places where this failed, because this is what, as I've said before, this is what Navalny represented. This is who Navalny was. He was being maneuvered into position, or they were trying to maneuver him into position, basically to do the same job on Russia that the compradors have done on Ukraine. That's who he was. That's who Tikhanovskaya is. Formerly in Belarus, now wandering around in exile in Europe. That's what they would have done to Belarus, these so-called nationalists. And I don't see how you could even describe them that way, because even from the point of view of only from the point of view of the stunted and retarded bourgeoisies of these countries can they be regarded as nationalists, because these bourgeois types, these stunted and ridiculous and crooked bourgeoisies, like, they regard the entire nation as just a disposable plaything for them. As long as they get paid by the imperialists, they don't care what happens to Ukraine or Belarus or Russia, because they've got an exile somewhere. So their nationalism is non-existent. It's a nationalism of symbolism, of like fake romanticism, of flags and bad poetry, and it consists of nothing material whatsoever. Thankfully, Tikhanovskaya's crew were defeated in Belarus and will be defeated again, I'm sure. Thankfully, Navalny got nowhere near the Kremlin. But this is the fate of Ukraine is what would have awaited a place like Belarus, and the fate of Ukraine even before the war would have been what happened to Russia had a guy like Navalny got into office and enacted the West's plan, which is to secure the breakup and destruction of the country. So the rule to work off, and I know this is a communist audience, so you'll know this, but if you're not a communist and you're from one of these countries, and maybe a former Soviet country, and you're watching this, the rule I would work off is anybody who comes and is to you and starts babbling about national pride, but who is an anti-communist and who is associated with the West in any shape or form, don't listen to that person. For God's sake, show them the door as quickly as possible, because that idiot is either just an idiot or a conscious agent of the imperialists who would be willing to feed the entire country into the meat grinder in return for a few dollars in his bank account. So, Grassy Knoll says, this sounds like genocide by proxy. It is. It is. And it is the responsibility of the British and American ruling classes. Just going through the comments here. Hello to Lertis. Hello to L Pool Photographs. We've already talked about the ruble going down. I don't think it matters all that much, to be completely honest. It's like one of those things whereby every time the ruble goes down again, some Western idiot starts screaming about start screaming and yelling about Russia collapsing. The ruble's been up and down, and I don't regard its recent losses as anything to worry too much about. Going through some more comments here. Hello to Lertis out in Rusholme. Just up the road from me. Yes, to respond to, I'm going to try and pronounce this, Fiskilski. If I've mispronounced your name, I do apologize. Certain Cyrillic letters I'm not good on. Certain of them I do recognize. Who says Kiev has delivered drones and even drug stimulants to keep the militants alert to HTS through Turkish territory in return for advice and technology. Kiev will go where it's told to go, and they've doubtless been told to go and aid the Al-Qaeda types in northern Syria. So this is the standard operating procedure. Edward says, can we trust Gennady Zyuganov and the KPRF leadership? Are they too compromised by the bourgeois Russian state and are too careerist? Zyuganov was almost, I think you mean president there. He can't be a revolutionary. Well, I read a lot of the KPRF stuff, and obviously through an automatic translation, and I think that the KPRF as a party have a pretty decent analysis of the current situation. As to how the KPRF are on the ground, I don't know. I'm not there. But certainly, Zyuganov's perspectives have been proven more correct than incorrect over time. They have had to work in a very difficult situation in Russia, which I don't think I appreciated until relatively recently with regard to this. Now, if you just excuse me for a moment, I've got a knock at the door, which I've got to go and answer. So hang on a moment. Apologies for that. That's the danger of live television. When you get a delivery coming to the door, you've got to go and get it. So to go back to the point about the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, it strikes me that they've been operating in very difficult conditions, which I didn't appreciate for a long time, coming from the Shite Trotskyite tradition. The condition that Russia was in was whereby it had, in the 90s, a comprador clique running it, but also you had, beyond that, their masters in the form of the US imperialists hanging over Russia and running active operations to try and further destroy Russia. So this is even in the 90s. And again, Putin has commented on this. It's fairly well established by now what the CIA and MI6 were up to in the Caucasus with the Chechen reactionaries. So you being a communist in 90s Russia, I imagine, was a tremendously difficult and dangerous experience, because on the one level, you want to get rid of this, Yeltsin clique that's running the country. On the other level, you're literally in a situation where beyond them, there is also the West stood there with a gun to your head. So I can understand, even if I might not necessarily fully agree with it, I can understand the decision-making process that people like Zyuganov went through in essentially forging an uneasy alliance with national bourgeois elements to preserve the integrity of the Russian state, which was under threat, I would say, all the way until like the mid-2000s when things were properly stabilized. So I can understand the decisions that were made then. And I can understand the fact that, the KPRF's analysis that I have read states that they are in a sort of a united front situation with elements in the Russian bourgeois who actually want to fight this war in Ukraine against NATO forces, against US imperialism, and to eliminate that threat. So I now feel like I comprehend their analysis better and how they saw their situation. And that's the position that I'm taking, is that they have a certain analysis of the situation which reflects the pressures that they, as communists in Russia, were under, and that the Russian system was under, and the external threats from imperialism, which were and remain severe. So as to whether I trust the KPRF leadership, well, I don't know. I'm not Russian. So I can only look at this from the outside and say that I understand the decisions that they've made and the fact that they participate in a bourgeois parliament. I think they've done a lot of valuable things, though, over the last 30 years. Whatever criticisms you can have of them, they maintained the historical memory of the Soviet Union at a time when it was under extreme attack from the Yeltsin clique, from all the pro-capitalist elements, from fascist elements inside Russia. They took the right position on the uprising in the Donbass by anti-fascist working class resistance forces. They were the ones who pushed for the Russian state to do something about this for 8 years, when the Russian system, headed by Putin, didn't want to do anything, reflecting, of course, the dithering and indecision and opposition of the Russian bourgeois to engaging in open military action against Western-backed forces. So they took the correct decision on that and pushed for the Russian state to take this action for the best part of a decade. And again, that was under pressure to not do that from forces inside Russia. They, as I said, kept the historical memory and historically accurate memory of the legacy of Stalin alive in Russia. And I know there are others outside of the KPRF who have done that as well, but they, as the main opposition party, being unapologetically for the legacy of Stalin, is an important thing. Defending thing. When I was a Trotskyite, I didn't see the value in this at all, but as I've become a Marxist-Leninist, you see the value in the KPRF doing things like defending the statues of Lenin across Russia, making sure that they weren't taken down. And that long period of reaction against the Soviet legacy, it seems to me, even like a recent article in Harper's Magazine had to admit that like the view of Stalin now inside Russia is more favorable than it has been at any point since the 1950s. So this is my long-winded answer to Edward's question. Whatever criticism you can have of the KPRF, they have done a lot of things inside Russia that have paid off ultimately. So one could say that perhaps Zyuganov and the party leaders took a long view, that they had to react to a very dangerous situation for Russia, that they could have faced a situation where a comprador element got into power there that could have broken up the whole country. So I can understand their decision-making process, and I think they've done a lot of very valuable things and have achieved a great deal with regards to the battle for socialism in Russia. And they wield a good deal of influence within this system now. So, as with everything, Edward, I would ask that, or what we do is we reach an all-around assessment of any communist party, and we have to include the context in which they operate before we can fully judge them. Michael says, Nicaragua and the Peruvian port through Brazil. Colombia just announced a study of another alternative. Panama was once part of Colombia until the US tore it off, which remains a very sore subject. Indeed, indeed. Hello to Paddy, who's listening while skiving off work. Excellent stuff. Yes, I could put Gramsci in the lineup, I suppose. I mean, Gramsci is a big influence on me personally. Irish Partisan says Gonzalo Lira's anniversary is coming up in early January, R.I.P. Yeah, that poor bastard really got it with both barrels. I mean, he was allowed to die, but he was allowed to die by the US, basically. If the US State Department wanted to get an American citizen out of custody, anywhere in the world where they've got influence, they will do it. Like, I mean, the reason why, I mean, Jeremy Lafredo, the Grey Zone journalist, was allowed to rot in a Israeli prison for a good few days, but the pressure on the US did pay off. I mean, eventually, you can see that they basically gave a nod to the Israelis and said, this is getting a bit embarrassing, you'd better let him go, just get him out of the country. So they could have done that with Gonzalo Lira easily. This US State Department rang up the Zelensky clique and said, look, get that guy out of the country if you want, but, you know, stick him on a plane back to the US or something. They could have done that. They didn't. They allowed him to die because, essentially, he had embarrassed them. And as I said at the time, I had nothing in common with Lira, politically speaking, but he wasn't killed because he was an admirer of the Pinochet system. He was killed because he told certain truths about the Ukrainian situation. So, yeah, the US allowed a US citizen to die, not for the first time and not for the last either. Svetlana says, Zyuganov says much that is wise and correct, but he needs to step aside and make way for younger leadership. Zyuganov is over 80. Socialism needs to be sexed up at least a tiny bit. Well, look, Zyuganov's been there a long time, like 30-odd years. Before that, he was an official in the CPSU. So he's done his time. I think it's the right time for the KPRF to get a new leadership. Like, Zyuganov's guided the party through a very difficult and often dangerous period, but like, he's been recognized as a leader who's contributed much to the rebuilding of the fight for socialism in Russia. So 80 years old, probably is time to retire, though judging from what I've seen of the man, he certainly doesn't want to. But yeah, like, step away and become like a senior figure in the party who advises. But yeah, there's younger leaders the KPRF has who could be brought on. I mean, it might be the time to do that might be, I would guess that Zyuganov will probably retire probably around about the same time Putin does, or maybe earlier because he's a bit older. But where I think that Zyuganov will probably stay on until the conclusion of the war, which might come soon, and then maybe you'll see new leadership come into the KPRF. they've been proven right on a lot of issues, and I think, and with the revival of the reputation of the Soviet period, the revival of the reputation of Stalin, it's the right time for the KPRF to move on and to put a new leadership in there that can basically cash in on the fact that they have been correct and that they have been proven right on all these issues, and to take the party forward. But Zyuganov, I think, has done a very good job in very difficult circumstances. One can question things that he's done, but I think overall his legacy will be regarded positively. Okay. Hello to Jenny, who's moderating in the chat. Good to have you with us. Hello to Nikki from Athens. Good to have you with us. Nikki says Fabien Roussel from the Communist Party of France is talking about seizing the means of production. Communist Party of France hasn't been in favour of that since about, what, 1945? Yeah, I'll believe that. At the same time, I believe that Jean-Luc Mélenchon is going to lead a socialist revolution. You know? It's absolutely ridiculous. Martin Milojevic says, sorry for swearing, but these people are the biggest cowards who would have no problem with pushing hundreds of thousands of kids into this unnecessary war. And Martin says, shame. Yeah, well, if they had a sense of shame, it would be useful to try and shame them. But one of the things that a British private school education gives you is absolutely no sense of shame whatsoever. You know, these people feel no shame. These people regard anybody who is beneath them as being, in class terms, as being disposable. The only reason they don't do drafting en masse here is because they know it would end very badly for them, that the population would turn on them very quickly. And that's the reason why they don't do it. That's the only reason they don't do it. If they thought they could possibly get away with it, they would. Well, the other problem, of course, being the severe lack of industry in the country. But if they could get away with drafting people into the army, they could also probably get away with drafting people to work for poverty wages or work for food in an industrial capacity. And they can't do any of those things for a variety of reasons, which is the reason why they're sending Ukrainians to die for them. Yes, there's still problems in Georgia, to answer Agricola's point. Yes, that's correct. Right, just scrolling through to the end here. Right, I'm just going to mention briefly the what went on in the visit of Putin to Kazakhstan recently, because this is something that is noteworthy, and I wanted to point out a couple of things. So, of course, Russia-Kazakhstan relations are, of course, something which is a developing story. Very close economic relationship there for a number of years, developing quicker as Russia reorientates its trade towards the east. So there was a number of agreements signed by Putin and Tokayev recently, so I wanted just to outline those. So Russia-Kazakhstan cooperation. I'm taking this from the Kremlin's transcript of or the Kremlin's reporting on what was agreed. Russia-Kazakhstan cooperation in energy is developing at a steady pace thanks to the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. The bulk of Kazakhstani oil exports pass through Russia and its port infrastructure on the Black Sea coast. In turn, Russian oil exports are delivered to China through Kazakhstan. Additionally, Russia imports Kazakhstani coal, and the two countries trade electricity with each other. There is an agreement over the construction of 3 new thermal power plants in Kazakhstan, and Russia's Gazprom remains a very prominent natural gas supplier to Kazakhstan. They're also increasing cooperation in nuclear energy with 6 joint ventures involved in uranium extraction, because, of course, Kazakhstan, I believe, is one of the biggest, has one of the biggest reserves of uranium under the soil, uranium mining operations that go on there, and have gone on there back to the Soviet period. And they, of course, Russia still operates the old Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, and is going to be constructing new rockets and space complexes for the Russian space program there. And Russian Kazakh economic relations in terms of trade has now reached 27 billion, according to a recent statement made by Tokayev. So very important relationship there that's only enhanced since the beginning of the special military operation. Point to make, though, is that there are others who are active in places like Kazakhstan, and one of those is, of course, the British imperialists, who have made, according to figures that were released a number of years ago now, 2020 figures, the British have invested at least 16 billion in Kazakhstan over the last 20 years. Very significant investment in Kazakh oil and gas, and according to Kazakh government and British government figures, like there's been significant British investment in mining, finance, chemicals, mechanical engineering, metallurgy, and even in the civil aviation sector. So there's quite a big British investment in Kazakhstan, which isn't something which can be ignored, because one of the big strategies that was, or one of the tactics, I should say, that was followed by the Brits and the Americans, is to try and pull the Central Asian countries away from Russia and into the orbit of the West. Now, that's why part of the reason why the British have gone so big on investments in Kazakhstan. They've also, by the way, done a massive investment over the period of the last 30 years inside Azerbaijan, of course. But Kazakhstan was another big one. A lot of money was made there. Nursultan Nazarbayev even employed the services of Tony Blair for a while. But doesn't look like that the British are going to get their way fully there, because there is simply too much money to be made for the Kazakh ruling clique in trade with Russia, but also in being a transit point between Russia, Iran, and China. And China is, of course, I think the single biggest trading partner of the Kazakhs. So the play that the British made in Kazakhstan was very substantial, and the British companies made a lot of money there. Certainly that's the case. But if the plan was to try and pull Kazakhstan decisively away from Russia and, of course, China, even with all the money the Brits have invested there and the operations of the Americans there, in the end, I don't think that's going to work. Ironically enough, of course, the heavy sanctioning of Russia and the cutting off of Russia from the West only encouraged greater amounts of Russian investment into Kazakhstan. So, again, according to the Kazakh government, there's now 23,000 Russian and joint Russian-Kazakh companies that operate in that country. And, of course, Kazakhstan, for all the assurances that Tokayev gives to the Western leaders about, how we are abiding by all the sanctions, a large number of those Russian and joint Russian-Kazakh companies running in that country are there basically to do sanctions busting. They are bringing in goods from the West and then transiting them through Kazakhstan into Russia. Whilst, of course, the Kazakh government will swear that they have no idea what is going on. And by the way, a lot of British companies are involved in that too, or will be involved in that, because they still don't want to lose out on a potential market. So they'll be transiting their goods through Kazakhstan into Russia. They'll be re-stamped with a badge that says "Products of Kazakhstan," albeit in Cyrillic. So the Kazakh ruling oligarchy is benefiting from basically being a site of sanctions busting as well as a transit point for trade. So if the plan was to pull them decisively into the Western orbit, I don't think that's succeeded, and I don't think it can succeed either. Right. So, Cobfan asks, wonder how much of that British investment involves pension funds. Yes, probably does. Undoubtedly, where there's dirty business going on, the whole British pension fund industry will be heavily involved in it. Heavily involved in it. Right. So, moving then to get to the last story before we take some more questions. This was a story that emerged recently. Trump mouthing off, as he always does, about Mexico. They're being incredibly unfair to me and incredibly unfair to us. all this fentanyl coming in, getting people addicted, it all comes from Mexico. They got to stop, or I'll put 25% tariffs on all Mexican products, including fajitas. Trump made his usual rambling threats about towards the Mexicans and the Canadians about border control and drugs coming into the United States. And Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, made a very strong statement back to Trump, which was, of course, ignored by all the pro-Trump right-wing hacks who were trying to pretend that Trump had won something here. But I think I wanted to read Sheinbaum's letter in full. You can find the translation on the Telegram channel because I think it raises some important points. So this was Sheinbaum's letter reads as follows. Dear President-elect Donald Trump, I am writing to you regarding your statement on Monday, November 25th concerning migration, fentanyl trafficking and tariffs. You may not be aware that Mexico has developed a comprehensive policy to assist migrants from different parts of the world who cross our territory en route to the southern border of the United States. As a result, and according to data from your country's Customs and Border Protection, encounters at the Mexico-United States border have decreased by 75% between December 2023 and November 2024. Moreover, half of those who arrive do so through a legally scheduled appointment under the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol 1 program. For these reasons, migrant caravans no longer arrive at the border. Even so, it is clear that we must work together to create a new labour mobility model that is necessary for your country, as well as address the root causes that compel families to leave their homes out of necessity. If even a small percentage of what the United States allocates to war were instead dedicated to building peace and fostering development, it would address the underlying causes of human mobility. On another note, and for humanitarian reasons, Mexico has consistently expressed its willingness to help prevent the fentanyl epidemic in the United States from continuing. This is, after all, a public health and consumption problem within your society. So far this year, Mexican armed forces and prosecutors have seized tons of various types of drugs, 10,340 firearms, and have detained 15,640 individuals for violence related to drug trafficking. Furthermore, the Mexican Congress is in the process of approving a constitutional reform to classify the production, distribution, and commercialization of fentanyl and other synthetic drugs as a serious crime without bail. However, it is publicly known that the chemical precursors used to produce this and other synthetic drugs are illegally entering Canada, the United States and Mexico from Asian countries. This underscores the need for international collaboration. You must be aware of the illegal trafficking of firearms into my country from the United States. 70% of the illegal weapons seized from criminals in Mexico come from your country. We do not produce these weapons, nor do we consume synthetic drugs. Tragically, it is in our country that lives are lost to the violence resulting from meeting the drug demand in yours. President Trump, migration and drug consumption in the United States cannot be addressed through threats or tariffs. What is needed is cooperation and mutual understanding to tackle these significant challenges. For every tariff, there will be a response in kind, until we put at risk our shared enterprises. Yes, shared. For instance, among Mexico's main exports to the United States are General Motors, Stellantis, and Ford Motor Company, which arrived in Mexico 80 years ago. Why impose a tariff that would jeopardize them? Such a measure would be unacceptable and would lead to inflation and job losses in both the United States and Mexico. I am convinced that North America's economic strength in maintaining our trade partnership, this allows us to remain competitive against other economic blocs. For this reason, I hope that dialogue is the best path to understanding peace and prosperity for our nations. I hope our teams can meet soon to discuss building joint solutions. So, what Sheinbaum is doing there is essentially trying to tell Trump that he needs to get his own house in order, essentially. She is, of course, completely correct in that the illegal weapons smuggling into Mexico is all done via the northern side of the border. The buying of guns is all done via the northern side of the border in the United States. A lot of it is anyway. The Obama administration was found to be running via the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms a program where they were smuggling automatic weapons into Mexico en masse in a program ultimately run by the ATF. Now, as to why the ATF was running that program, answers please on a postcard, because it could be for many reasons. It could be, as the official explanation went, this was a program designed to try and track those who purchased weapons inside Mexico and arrest them. If you believe that, then I have a massive load of tulip bulbs to sell you. That I've got from that is a very good investment if you're in the South Seas. The other explanations are, of course, that the US was deliberately flooding Mexico with weapons, sponsored by US federal supposed law enforcement agencies, to actually further destabilize Mexico. Certainly that's a possibility. They've done that in other parts of the world. And Sheinbaum is entirely correct to make the point that the demand for fentanyl comes largely from the United States, and that comes through the severe problems with drug addiction in the United States, which Trump says he wants to tackle. But then again, every American president would always say that. But given the fact that there is, and this is something that Sheinbaum doesn't mention in her letter, the heavy involvement of the Central Intelligence Agency and other official agencies of the United States government in drug smuggling, including opiate smuggling. This is something which, of course, is a problem which is generated by the conditions in the US itself. And so Sheinbaum deals with it, I think, in the correct manner, which is to say, well, do you really want to get involved in this tariff war with Mexico, given that one of the reasons why trade with Mexico is so important to the United States is because a lot of US companies went down south of the border to exploit Mexican labor. Now, Trump will say, I want them all to come back. They're going to all come back. Of course they won't, because not unless Trump's plans to drastically reduce the wages of American workers kick in, which of course wouldn't go well for him, they're going to stay in Mexico. Also, a lot of U.S. trade comes from China through Mexico into the United States, thanks to the fact that the Trump trade war basically continued in a different form under Biden. So now you can avoid, if you're Chinese and you want to get stuff into the U.S. market, you send it via Mexico, which is, again, one of the key elements of the U.S. economy is, of course, cheap commodities produced in China. And if you dodge it via Mexico, dodge tariffs via Mexico, through coming in via Mexico, you can still sell it cheaper than it would have been if of course, it would have been produced in the United States. So there's levers that the Mexican government can pull to make life difficult for Trump if that's what he wants to do. But I would say that Sheinbaum's response is a good example of how to approach US imperialism. She has the advantage in knowing that she does have mass support inside Mexico, and that there is a way in which you can deal with Trump, which her predecessor did, of course. That's López Obrador did show that you can bargain with Trump himself. What is more difficult to deal with is, of course, US imperialism as a system. And one of the reasons why you got clowns like Rubio babbling on about military intervention against the supposed cartels in Mexico is precisely because Mexico did elect López Obrador. It did elect Sheinbaum. They have been doing, essentially, running a genuine social democratic government in Mexico that is making improvements steadily to the lives of working class Mexicans, which of course many in the US bourgeois will hate, along with those in the Mexican comprador bourgeois, and will want to get rid of that government any way they can. Destabilizing the country via a US military intervention supposedly directed at the cartels is one such way they could try and do it, which is why you've had Rubio talking about it, you've had Pete Buttigieg talking about it on the Democratic side, various other talking heads, including like Tucker Carlson and that old reactionary Douglas McGregor talking about it. This is a common talking point. And the Sheinbaum government will be aware that that's a problem for them. And so she will be aware that she could probably reach a bargain with Trump if the two of them talk person to person but that doesn't change the threats to Mexico coming from a US ruling class, which is going to be looking to reassert itself in areas that it regards as its own backyard, which presents dangers to Mexico, along with dangers to, of course, Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, and Brazil. Remember, Trump is close to Bolsonaro, the clown, who is going to be on trial in Brazil soon. Lula, I think, ill-advisedly attached himself to the Biden administration, which has now lost and is going out of power. Now, I don't think this would have changed the hostility of Trump towards Lula and Brazil, but we can't rule out the US taking a more serious run at regime change in Brazil at some point soon. Trump would certainly be sympathetic to it, and that does help the US to be able to get the president on side before launching these things. So there's a lot of dangers here that would be there regardless of whoever occupied the White House. Right, okay, so just going back through some comments. Klavek enjoyed the tulip reference. Good to see that people picked up on that. Adam says, Canada has a problem with fentanyl addiction. Check out places like East Hastings in Vancouver. Britain has issues with it as well. Of course we do. We suffer from all the same problems that you do. Jenny says it's almost like people with power in the United States don't mind fentanyl coming in at all. They don't. They never have done, not really. Gracianol says these companies have no loyalty to any country. Well, they go where the money is. Go where the rate of profit is the highest. Rentier Oligarch says real wages in Mexico rose by around 35% across all labor categories between 2019 and 2023. Regime change. Oh yes, there was an article in Compact magazine on that. Yeah, they certainly succeeded in raising wages in Mexico. AMLO did, and Sheinbaum will want to continue that. So we will see what develops out of that. So final couple of points here. I'll be away tomorrow as I'm going down for a visit down to London, where I'll be speaking at the following book launch, which is book on entitled Trotskyism, Tool of Imperialism. And I'll put the link in the description there. So I'll be speaking at that CPGBML book launch on the rottenness of Trotskyism from the perspective of somebody who's been through some fairly rotten organizations. So I'll be talking at that tomorrow. On Sunday of this week, I'll be recording the next part of the interview with Comrade Isco Lat. So keep an ear out and an eye out for that one. We'll be covering in the second part of the interview the period of World War II, the Great Patriotic War, the collaboration of the Latvian and Estonian and Lithuanian fascists with the Nazis, the terror campaign waged by the fascist elements after World War II, and the rebuilding process in the Baltic states, and then also how revisionism helped to destroy the socialism inside the Baltic states and how that led up to our current situation. So I will be putting that on the channel when we finish the interviews. That will probably be up as a pre-recorded interview on Sunday evening, I would guess, providing I don't have to edit it too much. So keep an eye out for that on Sunday. To answer Svetlana's question, will the speech be filmed? I think it will. So it will be up on the CPGBML YouTube page, Proletarian TV. So yes, should emphasize it's not my book, it's just a book I've contributed to. It's a new release of work done by the founder of CPGBML, Harpal Bra. It's also got contributions from Jyoti Bra, who many of you know, and Ranjit Bra, and myself. So full details in the link. I will I'll point out the video of the speech that I do when it's ready. I'll be back with you again on Sunday of next week as we go. And thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and buy me a coffee. Patreon episode will probably be out on Monday of next week, and I'll be doing some work on that over the weekend. But until Sunday, when I return, thanks to everybody who has tuned in. Be sure to like and share the program if you haven't done so already, and I will be back with you again in a couple of days.
Ce știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și sfut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a